Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Remnant Podcast. I'm Kaden Schutz, and I'll be your host today. This podcast is built around sharing personal testimony of how God's unwavering pursuit continues to transform lives. Today, I'm excited to welcome my friend Shelby to the podcast. Tune in as we explore how the Lord touched Shelby's heart and changed her ways to live radically for the Lord. Shelby, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm so excited to
Me too.
have you here. Yeah.
I know.
So let's just start off by, how you grew up, how the Lord kind of encountered you, and just whatever else, you feel led to say.
All right. Sounds good. I'll start off with, honestly, I grew up in a Christian home. I was actually born and raised in Florida, so I actually wasn't from here. Moved here when I was about 8 years old, and it was kind of a big change at 8 years old, so that kind of started it. And then living in Ohio has really, I think that kind of really started when I was in church to kind of put me to where I am today. Got really involved in a church here and really just wanted to see the Lord for myself at that age. And so kind of grew up, going to that same church, got into the youth group and, started, probably 15, 16, really started getting into it and wanting to really just keep seeing the Lord deeper and what he had for me and what he had for my life. And at that time, that was honestly where my life completely flipped upside down for me. My parents actually divorced. It was something that kind of came completely out of the blue for me. It wasn't something that I was even remotely expecting. Mm-hmm. And being 16, you're kind of starting to get to that point to, hey, where am I going to go to college? What am I going to do? Just really trying to really find yourself and who you are, not just in the Lord, but also, in life and, where you're supposed to go and kind of what you're supposed to do with it. And so in that, my whole world was wrecked, and I'm an only child. I don't have any siblings. I don't have, I didn't have anybody to necessarily like kind of go through that with me. Yeah. And that it was kind of one of those things in church. It was seen as, oh no, like, oh, she comes from a broken family now, like her family isn't together. And so kind of had that perception, onto myself of, I'm broken now because my family's broken. And that was definitely something that I had to really work through. And I was really seeking the Lord of, hey, why is this happening? I'm the kind of person like, why is this going on? Why am I the one that has to go through this?
So you did have a relationship with the Lord at the time? Yeah. Like, would you call it a relationship?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would say so. I mean, it was kind of more of like an earlier stage of it. Sure. I had the foundation. I had, okay, I know the Holy Spirit. I know, this is how he moves. This is how he works. And kind of seeing how all of that, went on, Yeah. And, so I kind of had that foundation but then with that, I was like, where do I go from here? My home foundation just isn't there anymore. Yeah. I have my church foundation. I have my, my church people around me and things like that. But at the same time, when I come home, it felt so broken. It felt so apart. Like that foundation wasn't there for me. With my parents both growing up in church and kind of seeing how they had to separate and trying to really, like I said, more find that for myself.
Yeah. And I'm sure that adjustment too, I mean, with you moving from, Florida to Ohio and then now kind of having to move back and forth from place to place, I'm sure that was really tough.
Yeah, it was. And I know at the time, I mean, honestly, I didn't have the greatest relationship with my mom. And so when everything was kind of happening, I had to make a really tough decision. And I had to either decide, am I going to be with my mom or am I going to be with my dad? And growing up, I was a daddy's girl. I want to be with my dad. That's who I want. If you put me in a room and told me, hey, you go to your dad or go to your mom, who are you going to? I'm going to my dad. And so after they kind of divorced, I made that decision to go live with my dad. And it was, from then on, it kind of felt like a downhill spiral, honestly. My dad decided that, he grew up in church. He played on the worship team. He was a youth leader. He, grew up knowing the Word of God and knowing, what that's like. And those seeds were planted in his life that, ultimately he planted in me, when I was younger. And, so when I went to go live with him at the time, it really became something for me that he completely did a 180, went completely away from the Lord, went off and kind of started doing the things of the world. And that was kind of really for me where the anger and the frustration kind of came in, of, okay, you taught me to go do all of these things. And, you showed me, hey, this is how you're supposed to live, and this is what you're supposed to do, and this is what you're not supposed to do. And then going off and doing the complete opposite of what you just taught me.
Yeah.
So it was really, really hard to kind of see. So at that point, that kind of put a lot of doubt in my head of, okay, what really even is this? Is this really what it is?
Did you feel like that ever kind of tainted your relationship with the Lord? I mean, being that was a male, and then we always see the Lord as like our father, did that kind of taint your relationship, you feel like?
At the time, I would say I probably didn't realize it, that it did start there. But I mean, looking back on it now, it's kind of where it started.
Yeah.
Because, he is a father figure, that's who he is. And that definitely put a perspective in my head, or a lens that I looked through for a very long time of, this is how the father is to me, cause, and I don't want to feel like I'm bashing my dad, in any way, but, kind of seeing that whole transformation happen, that was all that I knew at that time was, okay, this is how a father's love is.
Yeah.
And kind of, it kind of portrayed into more of, a lot longer down, which we'll get into a little bit later, but, really kind of set that up at that time.
No, and that makes sense. I mean, I truly think that the way we see our fathers on earth it does kind of change how we see the Lord, especially at a young age like that. And when you're going through so many changes, it's hard to, see God as who he is, as a loving father, comforting father, when you might not have that stability. And
Yeah. So, kind of after that, is when I really started to get to the point of feeling like, okay, it's time for me to grow up. I, really need to start figuring it out, in a sense, right? I need to go get a job. I need to go do this. I need to figure out where I'm going to go to college. Really trying to kind of just set myself up, of if this isn't, what I want to keep doing, I'm going to go off and do what I want to do and how I want to live my life. And, so then kind of, I went through high school and graduated, and that's really kind of where I felt like, all right, I'm going to go do what I want to do. Everything you told me not to go do, I'm going to go do it just because I can. And that was really when I started getting into, like drinking, honestly, got really heavily involved in that, and, trying to hide it from everybody, which, I mean, I don't know if I'd hit it pretty well or not. But trying to hide it and honestly just suppress all of the frustration and the anger. And that's kind of where I felt like a lot of the rejection kind of started to settle in. And, I tried to basically numb it. And like hide it and say, you know what, I'm going to go out, have fun. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do that just because I can. And, I kind of had the mentality of like, when you tell a kid, no, don't do that, I'm trying to protect you from something, and they want to go do it anyways. That was kind of the mentality that I had. And, then when I couldn't find it really in alcohol, I would go off and I would say, you know what, well, I'll go find it in this relationship, and I'll go find it in that relationship. And it got to the point to where I would mix both of them and got really just, hey, I'm going to go sleep with this person just because I want to feel the affection of something. I want to feel the love of something in some way, shape, or form. And that was one of the things that I just put it as a mask. Honestly. I just have a question. Can we back up to your relationship with your mom? Like when you were growing up, you were living with your dad. Did you see her often? Were you guys, distant, after the divorce? Like kind of what happened there? I wouldn't really say it was necessarily distant. It was kind of just like, hey, how are you doing? How's school going? How's this going? Didn't really have a relationship with her, just because when I started really growing up, I would say probably between I was like by 13, 16, the profession that my mom was in, I never really got to see her in general. And so just with her work schedule and stuff, it didn't work out with me going to school. I would see her when I was getting ready to leave for school, and then she was gone by the time I got home from sports and everything like that. So I wouldn't say the relationship was bad, but there was just a lot there that, I mean, honestly kind of started more of like a resentment, like towards her, just because, I mean, I played sports my whole life. That's kind of just what I did. Yeah. And, I look back on it now and I know that she was doing what she had to do. Yeah. And I understand that, she couldn't be there at all the times that I wanted her to be there. Mm-hmm. But now, I mean, our relationship is completely different than what it was. Yeah. And there was a lot of, different like healing and things like that had to come from it, and things that I had to heal from. And it wasn't even things that she necessarily, knew that I held against her. Yeah. And so with that, like I said, I mean, it wasn't like a terrible relationship. It was kind of, I wouldn't say surface level, but at that point I was just trying to kind of hide all of my emotions from everybody. More specifically her and my dad, because I didn't want to feel like I was pinning them against each other. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, it's a lot to carry. I feel like you being an only child and you having a lot of burdens from your parents that you can't tell to everybody. It's like you don't understand. Who else would understand? Mm-hmm. You don't have a sibling to kind of go along with. And I get it. That resentment, that anger probably rooted real deep. Yeah. So, yeah, it was definitely something that started. And I mean, like I said, I look back on it now and I'm like, I didn't even realize that was happening, Mm-hmm. But now that I see it for what it was, you just call it out and say, all right, let's deal with it. Yeah. Rather than just saying, hey, I'm going to keep suppressing it. And that's what I did for so long. And that's what kind of got me into, those situations that I put myself in. Mm-hmm. I mean, not necessarily somebody told me to go into that situation. It was a choice that I made of, hey, I just don't want to deal with this anymore. So let me shove it down and I'm going to fill it with something else. Yeah. So. Yeah. Praise God for that healing that took place. That's awesome. Yeah. So kind of off to, I guess, where we left off, with, just going around and trying to suppress it, trying to cover it up with so many other things. And that was kind of, for me, realizing that I was just trying to find love in all the wrong places. Mm-hmm. And in those relationships, it was fulfilling for a time, and then it was like, all right, this isn't good enough anymore, so let me find something else, or let me find the next person that it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And kind of I did that for quite some time. I would say probably like a year or two, roughly, if I had to guess. I couldn't tell you the exact time frame. But then I realized I didn't want to go to college anymore. And I was like, I'm just going to go work full time, and this is what I'm going to do. And I'm really going to kind of invest myself in my career. And so I went off and did that. And in those moments, I actually met somebody. Mm-hmm. And it started as an emotional connection of, okay, this person grew up in church. I grew up in church. Mm-hmm. So, those connections kind of start pretty quick. Sure. And then realizing really, really, really quickly that I just was like, all right, what is this? And I got into a homosexual relationship. And it wasn't something that was just emotional. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of things that I really got pushed into, whether I wanted to do it or not. And it was one of those things of, okay, this person shows me the love that I haven't seen before. Yeah. And that was definitely something that I realized now, looking back on it now, of that's not even the love that I'm deserving of.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I look back on that situation, and I realize that you kind of get pushed into certain things, right? You get put in certain situations, but you either have a choice of, am I going to step through that door and realize that it's the wrong situation? Or am I going to stay back and say, you know what, this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
And in those situations, I was like, well, you know, I want this love. I want to keep having this. I want, you know, what I feel like I haven't had, you know? And so kind of kept pursuing that. And then honestly, that relationship ended, and it was honestly by the grace of God that it did. And the way that it ended, it was, you know, I look back on it now and I'm like, thank God, because I don't know where I would be.
Yeah.
You know? And that was kind of where the Lord really gripped me and said, you know, are you going to let me show you the love that you actually deserve?
Amen.
And so that really, I mean, gripped me, and I was like, well, you know, what do you mean by that? You know, because for so long I'm like, well, I've done this and I've done that. And, you know, I've gotten into something that is, you know, the worst of the worst, you know, kind of growing up. That's kind of what we were taught, or what I was taught. And it was something that wasn't really talked about. It was just like, hey, you don't do this. And there's not really like an explanation of why you do it.
Yeah.
You know? And so really having to work through that was, you know, something that the Lord said, let me deal with this. Let me take it. And honestly, I mean, probably within the last couple of months, I really fully have dealt with it, because it's something that I feel like it's not something that you can just say, hey, I'm done with this. You know, there's a process that has to come through with it, and there's different layers to it that, you know, you don't always necessarily recognize that are there.
Are you talking about loving the attention or the homosexuality part?
Kind of both.
Okay.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Because I wanted the attention of, I want to be loved and cared for.
Sure.
And finding that in that relationship. Okay. And so kind of peeling back those layers of the healing of, okay, you know, I chose to go into this type of relationship, and all the choices that I made in that relationship, you know, and that was kind of like, you know, the first few layers of, okay, you know, like, Lord, please forgive me, you know, for making those decisions. Yeah. But then also getting down to the part of, you know, then that was kind of when shame and rejection and everything kind of set in of, I can't talk about this anymore. Like, I can't talk about this with anybody. And that was really where kind of, I guess that all kind of came to a head, and the Lord's like, let me deal with this layer by layer.
So I guess I have two questions.
Okay.
The first one, and you can answer this however you want to, but the first one is kind of to you, what made that relationship with that woman like so attractive to you? You know, I assume you've had some, you know, deeper reflection on that now. So I guess that would just be my question. But also, what's your relationship with the Lord like throughout all of this? Because, you know, we talked about the drinking, we talked about the attention, you know, from different relationships and stuff. Then we talked about that, you know, more significant one that you just explained. And so my question is, was the Lord still tugging on your heart? Were you still talking to him? Kind of where was that?
I mean, he was still tugging on my heart. I mean, there was different situations where I'm like, you know, that conviction kind of came in. Yeah. And I'm like, I know what this is, and I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm going to continue to do it anyways, because I want this. Like, she's giving me all the attention that I want, and she's giving me everything that I need in this moment. And that was kind of, I guess, where all of that kind of started, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, you know, I would say probably after all that happened, just walking through it has honestly, like I said, it's been by the grace of God. I mean, I honestly haven't like openly talked about this and, you know, other than, you know, one-on-one conversations. It's so much easier to have a one-on-one conversation with something that, you know, is easy to talk about and you feel like, you know, you're kind of in a safe place for that. But, you know, I've kind of gotten the revelation, that, you know, it is something that needs to be talked about.
Yeah. Well, and I think the enemy likes to isolate us and think, you know, we hear this all the time, that we think that we're alone in our problems and that we can't get through these problems with other people because we'll feel the judgment, we'll feel the shame. And it's just so wrong. I mean, there's nothing further from the truth, because the Lord has people around us to be companions, to carry one another's burdens. And yes, we know we're supposed to give him, you know, our burdens, but we also are supposed to help our friends and help our loved ones carry this. And you're not alone with the things that you deal with. Yeah. And that's what makes this testimony so beautiful, because it's not just one person's encounter. You know, so many people have had that same kind of thing, but it comes along in different ways. And it's so beautiful to see how he shapes and molds a story like that.
Yeah. And it's funny you kind of said it, because you said alone, right? Like the enemy wants to isolate us and make us feel alone. And that was kind of when I was, you know, kind of working through a lot of that healing, when the enemy really was like, hey, you're alone in this. Yeah. You know, nobody really understands like what you're going through. And that kind of set me up even to, you know, I mean, I went through my parents' divorce alone, you know, and he's like, you're always going to be alone. You're like, nobody's going to understand what you've been through, and nobody's going to understand why, you know, you had to go through these things. They're just going to look at you and say, oh, well, she just went off and did this. And she, you know, just went off and did that. And that's the farthest thing from the truth. Like you said, Absolutely. You know, like everybody has their own story, and whether, you know, it's something that we choose to put in ourselves and we make those decisions and put ourselves in those situations. But then there's other times where it's, you know, hey, all right, I haven't been dealt the cards, right? Yeah. But what am I going to do with it? How am I going to allow the Lord to use this? Because I mean, that's ultimately where it's at, is he takes beauty for ashes. Yeah. Right. Absolutely. So, I mean, and that's kind of where I feel like I'm at this point, honestly, is, you know, I want to be able to talk about it, and I want to really get past all the fear and the shame and saying, hey, I'm not alone in this. And I know that there's people that are probably going to hear this and be like, you know, I've struggled with this too. And just kind of a reminder to them of, you know, you aren't alone. There are people that have gone through similar things, and it may not necessarily be the exact same thing that, you know, I've been through or anybody else has been through, but it's something that we all have a similar story in some way, shape, or form. And are we willing to talk about it and call it out for what it is? Because it's not the best that the Lord has for us. Yeah. No, you're right. The verse, I mean, I always feel like I get this verse in my head when we're talking about testimonies, and I'm sure everybody else will know it, but, and they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Like just being able to speak it out says, this has no right over me anymore. Yeah. You know, it's got no hold on me anymore. No, and it doesn't, because there is no shame. Yeah. There is no shame in those who are in Christ Jesus. There's no condemnation. Yeah. So it's so liberating. Yeah. It's so liberating to just be able to say, this is my story. And I want whoever this reaches to, you know, have something from it. You know, it's just beautiful to see that. Yeah. So. Yeah. I don't know. That's kind of honestly just, I mean, most of it, I mean, from that point on, I, you know, let the Lord really deal with me. And I would say probably within the last couple of months or so is when I really allowed the Lord to say, hey, let me take that shame and that fear from you. Let's, you know, let's not keep holding on to this, because it's not something that you're supposed to hold on to anymore. And coming out of that, and, you know, the rejection of feeling like, you know, this isn't something that you can keep to yourself. You know, it's something that I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't want to keep suppressing it because I did that for so long.
Right.
And I don't want to keep falling back into that cycle. And so that's kind of where I feel like the Lord has really shown me the last couple of months of, you know, this is where, you know, you started, this is where you're at, but let's keep going.
Yeah. So what was kind of that breakthrough moment for you? I feel like there's a breakthrough moment somewhere in this story where, you know, you realized, oh Lord, I'm sorry for the things, but I want to do it your way. So what was that moment for you? How did that all get started?
I mean, I feel like it kind of came in layers.
Okay.
The more that I kind of honestly look at it. I mean, it was one of those things where it kind of came out of that relationship, realizing that, hey, I really want to understand what love is like.
Yeah.
And the kind of love that I'm supposed to have.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of been something that I've really learned probably, you know, within the last couple of years, honestly. I can't really honestly like pinpoint a specific point right now. But realizing that the love of a father is ultimately all the love that I need. Mm-hmm. In whatever capacity that is, whether it is, you know, somebody who, I mean, he sticks closer than a brother, right? So like whether he's going to be a friend or he needs to be father in those moments, that was kind of, like I said, I can't really pinpoint a specific like point or a specific moment. Yeah. But when that kind of breakthrough happened, it was in so many different ways and different layers.
Yeah. It kind of sounds like he was just trying to like reveal to you his character and who he is and how he loves you. And, you know, that's beautiful. Yeah. I mean, I know you have a great community now, you know, with your church family and all that. Yeah. So, kind of my question would be, when did you get really involved in community and stuff? Were you always super involved? I mean,
yeah, I was always super involved. But it really, the community probably started, I would say probably about 4 or 5 years ago, roughly, when I came to the church that I'm currently at right now. Okay. And really, breaking down all of those walls, honestly, and them honestly calling out and not coddling me and what it was. Yeah. And saying, hey, we're just going to let her kind of do her own thing. And them actually coming to me and saying, hey, we're not going to let you stay in this place. Because you're not meant to stay in this place. You're meant to keep growing, and you're meant to keep going higher and higher and go from glory to glory. And so that was kind of the community that I had, and realizing that I'm the kind of person, I'm very blunt, and I'm very blunt in tough conversations. And so I have to kind of receive that in that way of, hey, let's not keep sitting here. I can't get, you know, hey, this is all good. You know, a little tap on the shoulder. Hey, you can't be doing this. Right. It's more, hey, I got to get in your face and, you know, let's go. Let's keep moving. Let's not, you know, sit and stay in this position or stay in this place, because you're not meant to be in that. Yeah.
No, I mean, you're absolutely not. It goes all back to that isolation piece where you're kind of like, you're not supposed to stay in that season of, oh, I'm alone. Mm-hmm. And that's beautiful that, you know, he's giving you this community. And I know you got some fiery women that call it out. Call it out.
They do. They do. They're not afraid to. They'll give me a look, and it's like, I call it the mom look of, you know, okay, all right, let's go talk. You know, let's talk it out. Let's do that. Right. You know, and I'm very thankful for them, and I'm thankful for the leaders that are above me too. Mm-hmm. You know, that look at me and say, hey, you know, let's talk about this. Let's not keep going into this cycle that you used to do. Don't put the walls up. You know, don't suppress them. Because that's not what you're supposed to do. That's not where you're supposed to stay.
Yeah. So. You're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, is there anything else that, you know, you're feeling led to share or talk about, dive in deeper to? Anything?
No, I think just the biggest thing is, you know, just whatever your testimony is, whoever's listening to this, you know, there's no shame. There's no condemnation. You know, I mean, we're all in Christ, no matter what it is, no matter, you know, how bad that you think that it is. And don't let the enemy try and isolate you and tell you that you're alone and that, you know, you can't talk about the things that you're too scared to talk about. And that's something that, I really struggled with for a very long time. And I'm to the point now to where I don't want to go to him and say no anymore. I want to be able to go to the Lord and say, okay, you can have this, whatever it looks like, whatever it sounds like. And I think sometimes we take that saying, and I know it's some song lyrics as well, but do we really actually, grasp that? Right?
Yeah.
Like whatever it looks like, whatever it sounds like, even if it's the most beautiful thing and you just sit and cry, or is it something that, I need to scream and let it out,
Yeah. Surrender comes in all different forms. And it's hard when you have to get down to that super vulnerable place like that.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you for sharing your testimony, Shelby.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to the Remnant Podcast. The Remnant Podcast is part of Remnant Generation Ministries, a 501c3 registered nonprofit. This podcast is fully supported by Remnant Generation Ministries and from listeners like you. If you have been encouraged by these testimonies, please consider partnering with us through our website at remnantgeneration.net/give or by clicking on the link below labeled support. Thank you and God bless.